This is a late intermediate technique routine for classical guitar. This is part of a video series that I've been doing. So we've done the beginner routine, we've done the late beginner routine, early intermediate routine, intermediate routine. This is the late intermediate routine, and then we'll do early advanced routine as well. This all comes from my technique book, which you can get as a hard copy or as a PDF. But if you have your own books, you can use your own books and formulate your routine based on those. Lots of us have tons of technique books, right? My book has the routines at the beginning, has everything you need, and there's a link for that under the video. But like I said, use your other books if you wish. Let me just talk about what we're going to do in this video. The main thing we're going to do is just kind of talk about how to manage your practice routine. There's far too much material in my routine to cover in one practice session, so we have to have a discussion about how to use it. Now, I'll be talking a lot, so if you're actually looking for a lesson on the physical movements, like the actual techniques, go to the book link, and all the videos, all the lessons for the exercises are free to watch. So all of the Barre exercises, all the Tremolo exercises, all the scale exercises, those are all free, and you can get lots of the tips that I give through those videos. But this video will be just talking about the routine itself and how to manage your time and manage the idea of creating a practice routine. So it's going to be lots of talking. The late intermediate routine is very similar to the intermediate routine, except that the exercises are just getting a little bit more difficult. So the core things that we're going to look at are very much the same as the intermediate routine, but we're just going to be kind of bringing them to the next level. That's kind of it. So I think maybe the first thing I should do is just quickly go through all of the things in my routine. I'll try to do this as concisely as possible, and then I'll just kind of have a larger discussion as to how you should go about this. And before I tell you each of the items, though, just remember there's too much stuff. So what you have to fit into every practice session is the core material. The core material is scales, arpeggios, slurs, barre, and stretch and finger independence exercises. If you're doing a little bit of those 5 groups in each of your practice sessions, you're probably doing okay. You're doing a good job. You're working on all the things that guitar players need to work on to play the basic traditional repertoire. So again, scales, arpeggios, slurs, barre, and stretch exercises. All of the individual items that I'm going to talk about, like the 20 items I'm going to talk about, they fit into those categories. They're exercises to help improve your scales, or exercises to improve your arpeggios, exercises to improve your barre, exercises to improve your ability to accomplish stretch and finger independence. So, too many things, but some of the things help you accomplish greater tasks. So let's go through all of the items now. The first thing is I have 100 open string exercises in my book. Those are for the right hand. So they're just tons of like patterns, right? Patterns starting on different fingers. Some of the patterns like stretch the hand out, do various things. There's even like cross string trill exercises at the end. For the most part, you don't really have to practice these open string exercises, but you should go through all of them and make sure that you can confidently play each one, including the 3-fingered melodic patterns, or the groups of 2 using 3 fingers. All those combinations you should be able to do. So you have to go through and check off all the ones that you've accomplished and make a list of the ones that you are not good at. And make sure you're practicing those ones so that there's no gaps in your technique. When you have a really good teacher, the teacher makes sure that you focus your energy towards your weaknesses. So you have to go through all of those 100 exercises and make sure you can do each one and make a list of the ones that you can't do and practice those. Then you can practice the Giuliani Arpeggios, or right hand studies. I would cycle through number 1 to number 110. So that's a ton of arpeggios. Same thing. Go through them at, making sure you can play them, each of them confidently, check them off as you go, and come up with a list of ones that you're not very good at or you feel that are very awkward, and practice those ones. If you feel good with all of them, cycle through them, pick 25 a day or something like that, or pick 10 a day and cycle through all 120 or all 110 for now. The next thing would be scales. So I've listed chromatic scales. We've covered that already, but you can also include like chromatic scales that go across the strings. And that's in the book, of course. There's movable scales. That's all your like scales that can be played anywhere, right? And with all the different finger combinations, rest stroke, free stroke, 3-fingered scales. So scales. You should also now include open string shift scales. That's when you're playing a scale in first position, and on the open E, for example, you shift up to a higher position. That increases the shift distance, which is really great shift practice, but it's also, that's how we play repertoire. We often shift on an open string and go to an upper position. So you should start practicing those to make sure you're good at those, because they're going to come up in your pieces, especially at the late intermediate kind of level. You should also be doing some triadic arpeggios. That's using triads and playing through triads. Various instruments do this all the time. Like piano lessons, you do it almost from not the first lesson, but like maybe very close to the very beginning. They're hard on guitar, but now it's time to start digging into those, because triads are a big part of music and you have to be able to do them. Slurs. For the most part, you go through all my slur exercises. They're designed to help you improve your slurs, but then you can go into slur scales. Slur scales will combine a number of techniques and a number of slur patterns into one. Etc., etc. So they like have shifts and they have various combinations of fingers. They're harder to control. So I think the important thing is that you start to, if you feel comfortable with all the slur exercises, and some of my slur exercises are quite difficult, so make sure you practice them. But then you can move on to slur scales. Saves you a lot of time and covers a lot of ground, because it covers hammer-ons and pull-offs in the same kind of exercise, along with other techniques. Puts them in a musical context. Finger independence, go through all of the finger independence. If there's any that you feel like you can't do, like you're lacking some finger independence, then you got to work that out. So you select those ones and make sure you practice them. Stretch exercises. I do stretch exercises every day. Horizontal stretches where you put a distance between one of the finger groups. I also do vertical stretches. So you can practice those ones. I like to use those every single day. I don't skip them ever, just because it warms up my hand nicely. Now, you can skip some of the easier finger independence exercises and now start playing scales in thirds, sixths, octaves. You've seen those before in the previous routines, but scales in thirds, sixths, octaves, tenths. Those patterns give you so many like different combinations of fingers, like 2-finger independence. Some of them kind of are stretches when you get into the chromatic like octaves, for example. So those are another way to like skip some of the easier exercises, but get finger independence work into your hands. So I think that's a really important factor. So take a look at those. Barre exercises, you should do these every day probably. I have a couple that I like. Some of the exercises in my book aim to improve your barre. Other ones are just like maintenance. You just practice them every day to maintain your technique. And barre is a tricky technique. It gives lots of people trouble, so you got to practice it every day. Tremolo is another one. To some extent, if you're going through all the Giuliani and exercises and my right hand open string exercises, you're kind of training yourself to play tremolo anyway. But if you're, you might want to look at some of the more difficult tremolo exercises and maintain those every day just to keep your tremolo in order. But again, I actually really personally believe that a well-rounded right hand technique, scales and arpeggios, if you practice those often, you'll be able to play tremolo because it's training your fingers how to work. But certainly if you're playing a tremolo piece, you stay on that tremolo. Raschiato, I would go through them. I don't do them every day, actually. Maybe that's something that's bad about my practice routine. I have them listed, though, because it's probably a good idea. But you could include them regularly or every couple days. They're a good warm-up for the right hand, so feel free to do that. But if any of them give you trouble, definitely practice them. Same thing. No, so natural harmonics, those are like harmonics occurring on open strings. If you can do them and you can do them well, then maybe you don't have to practice them every day, but you should go through them and make sure you can do the basic ones, right? And then the last item is left hand relaxation and muting. Part of the reason we do this is to learn to relax the left hand and also to disassociate the two hands. Sometimes when the right hand digs in, the left hand starts to squeeze really hard. So if you do a muted exercise, that's when you touch the string at the right place, but you don't push it down to the fret. You get this kind of muted sound. That means you can dig in hard with this hand, but this hand has to be super light, disassociating the two hands from that urge to squeeze when this hand's, a little bit more, using more tension. And so that's some basic ideas about that. So, like I said, that's lots of material. Make sure you group it into the 5 groups I talked about: scales, arpeggios, slurs, barre, stretch, and finger independence. And then you go through all the material, making sure you can accomplish all of it at first, and then come up with a little routine of your own based on some of your weaknesses and some of the just basic things that we have to maintain, like some kind of slur exercise. At the late intermediate routine, do not let any unresolved issues continue forward. If you have any unresolved issues, like some of the right hand open string patterns give you trouble, you have to resolve those. You're not going to jump to the advanced level if you have foundational problems in your technique. So that's one of the reasons I have this book and have these routines, is that I want my students to go through all of these exercises and resolve any issues before they cause problems, because I know that my students could go to the advanced level sometimes, but they'll hit a wall somewhere. There'll be some kind of foundational issue that holds them back, or that makes some section of a piece too difficult for them to play. So you have to resolve all those issues. You have to get some relaxation working. At this stage, some of the exercises are harder, so make sure there's not too much tension in your hand. You're not forcing things. And the other thing is that some of the intervallic studies, like thirds, sixths, octaves, tenths, that's kind of good. It's not just technique. That's guitar knowledge. That's fingerboard knowledge. And you want to start knowing that. Like at the advanced level, you want to start to be able to devour repertoire, to really dive in and learn everything nice and quick. And that requires a knowledge of the instrument. Now, music theory is very important to this conversation, but it's separate from my book. So taking a music theory class is very important. That's what post-secondary students do. But I'll leave that up to you to explore. I do have recommendations on the site for theory books, but getting a theory teacher would be great. And the other thing that I haven't talked about yet is etudes. Again, that's outside the scope of my book. I do have an etude book. You can go on the site and check that out. But my main advice is that at the late intermediate stage, it's just about time to start going through entire opuses of etudes. Going through, for example, all of the Carcassi etudes, number 1 to 24, like all of them. And doing that will put your technique into a musical context. It's outside of the discussion that we're having today, but I wanted to mention it because it is part of a healthy technique, is to have a musical technique, and etudes are a big part of that. So going through entire opuses, not skipping any etudes, is really big. As a teacher, that's one thing that really helped me, is my students play all these different etudes, and after a while I went through all of them, and it really showed me some of my own personal difficulties that I had in technique and musicality, and so I had to resolve those because I have to teach the pieces or make videos on them. So that's a very important factor. So that's the late intermediate routine. The next routine is going to be the early advanced routine, and really at the early advanced routine, I'm just going to say like practice the whole book. But I'll have a few extra things to mention in regards to being careful about your level, and being careful to reevaluate your level regularly to make sure your quality level is high.